All right, so I was over at Speedy's the other day, and him and I were shooting the shit like we always do. And he started talking about the times he had been at the Houston warehouse. So I told him, hang on, let me set up a camera right quick. So I had my camera in my pocket. I just literally put it right on the workbench that we were leaning against. And I hit record and I said, go. Okay, so that's where it starts. Him and I had already been talking for like 30 minutes. So we missed half the conversation, but I'm glad that I was able to record this because, man, the conversations that I have with Speedy are always just so incredible. And I don't think he realizes how much knowledge he has passed on to me. And I'm very thankful for that. But anyway, I went ahead and recorded this conversation, and I'm hoping I can do more going forward because you'll see what I mean. After you watch this video, you will see what I mean. Enough of me, let's get into it. This is very interesting stuff.
I was explaining to Erik, I had a sporer at one time that had won every match I had shot in Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Texas. And Virgil King with the warehouse, the mysterious warehouse, shot with us all the time, and he wanted to know how good did I think that gun actually shot. And I just told him, hey, it's won every match I've shot in. I said, nobody's beat it this year. So he wanted me to bring that gun to the warehouse to see how good it actually shot. So I went out there that Friday, and Virgil in the warehouse would walk the length of the warehouse. If he would feel warm and cold spots, he said, we can't shoot. And so he said we had to wait about an hour. So this started about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and by about 1 o'clock that evening or in the morning, he was ready to shoot. So it was a long day in the warehouse, needless to say, but we did a lot of BS sessions in there.
Yeah.
And when we started to shoot my gun, it shot the same inside as it did outside, which at that point in time, I was shooting about a low 2 ag, a 2.0 to a 2.2 ag, and that's exactly about what it shot in the warehouse. He said, well, how'd you win with this gun? I said, well, it's shooting just like it always does, it just doesn't do anything stupid. So anyway, Virgil said, we're gonna tune this gun. We started using lighter and lighter neck tension, and he started moving the bullets back from the hard jam, back 1,000ths at a time. I said, you can wear my barrel out by the time we get this thing shooting. But he actually got it to where it shot a five shot group ag below 1/10 of an inch. So all groups were in the zeros. And then he said, well, let's repeat that. So we shot a second aggregate again in the zeros. And anyway, so I was so excited about that, I couldn't wait to go to the next match. We took that thing out, and I was shooting so bad it looked like I never picked up a gun. In fact, they bought me a book on gun control after that. So I went back to my old load, my old neck tension, my old bullet seating depth, and it went right back to shooting twos. I won the last 2 matches of the year with that gun.
So the gun just didn't shoot tiny, but didn't shoot big.
Right.
So how do you win bench race? You don't win by shooting small groups, right?
No, I'm not a small group shooter.
No, but how do you win?
You shoot by
win
shooting
by
consistency.
Well, the saying is you don't win by shooting small groups. You win by not shooting big groups.
Right. Exactly.
So your gun just wouldn't shoot big groups.
Right.
It wouldn't shoot small ones, but it also wouldn't shoot
right.
big ones.
It was just happy gun all day long. You know. But
Well,
it just goes to show a lot of times when you've got facilities like that, it's a great testing facilities if you want to test components. Your bullets, are they capable of shooting that way? The powders, are they capable of shooting that way? The primers, are they capable of shooting like that? And then you have to do what they're capable of out in the real elements,
Right. So one thing that most people don't know about me is I got the 1,000-yard range.
Right.
When I'm working up loads, I often try to go out in the morning, and just kind of get a starting load. But I like to test when it's windy. That's when I like to test.
Right. Well, we never even do load development unless it's windy.
Yeah, and most people want to do load development when it's calm. I don't like shooting when it's calm. It doesn't tell me anything because I've seen it a million times over where once the wind starts to blow, sometimes that gun just flattens out and everything just gets happy.
Right.
And sometimes the reverse happens. Once the wind blows, it just goes to heck.
Yeah. Well, we never tuned in dead calm conditions. When I first started learning how to shoot, I always wanted to shoot in the conditions, so I tuned my gun in those conditions as well. And I used to get to the range about, 10, 11, 12 o'clock, and all my buddies who were trying to shoot them little groups in calm were leaving,
Yeah.
And it was always like, well, what'd you do, Speedy? Sleep late today? I said,
Yeah.
no, this is what I want to shoot, because this is when you win and lose a match.
Right.
In the wind, in the conditions,
Right. I've had guns that. So what causes that? What causes a rifle to go in tune or out of tune in the wind? Most people think it's them, but the guns I've seen them because I've done a lot of testing because I have access to 1,000-yard range.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, like I said, when it's calm, they would just shoot, and then when the wind blows, all of a sudden they just quit shooting.
Yeah. Well, I think what's happening is that you're demonstrating in the wind a stable bullet.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've got a projectile that's flying through the wind perfectly stable, it doesn't present a large profile to the wind acting on it, so it doesn't move quite as much. But if you've got a bullet that you've developed a load for that's not stable, now you've got this profile, so
Right.
this profile is going to move a whole lot more than this profile.
Much less stable too.
Right.
So yeah, that's what I think. I think and this, I don't believe in the whole bullet going to sleep thing, but I don't know if you do. We can talk about that. But I think we've talked about this a million times that a gun that is in tune will buck the wind better
Right.
than a gun that's not in tune.
Oh, for sure. I'll go back in time one more time. When I first started shooting and I got to where I was pretty good, there was a bullet manufacturer, maybe a lot of people have heard of him. His name was Ali Uber. And he probably made the best 6mm bullet that had ever been made, and people still try to mimic that profile. And Don Geraci, who was one of the better adventurous shooters at the time, said, Speedy, if you really want to get good, buy some Uber bullets. He said it's almost like cheating,
Mm-hmm.
And I was shooting pretty good at the time, so I called Ali and ordered a couple of thousand of his bullets. And when they came in, sure enough, my shooting improved just crazy good.
Overnight.
Yep. And so I was real good friends with Bob Mccoy. He's the ballistician that Brian Litt cites in his books all the time. He worked there at Aberdeen. And I told him about this bullet that I had just got, and about the comment that Don Geraci had made about shooting these bullets was almost like cheating. He said, well, send me one. And so I sent him a few of them. And back then they did a shadow graph. They'd have the coordinate measuring machines and out to check it. So anyway, we didn't have the internet or anything. We had phone call and we had mail, And so I'm waiting and waiting. About 3 weeks go by. I finally get a letter from Bob McCoy, and it's got a profile of that Uber bullet. And he said, give me a call when you get a chance in the bottom of the letter. And I called him. I said, say, I got your letter. I said, what does this mean? I said, is this really a cool bullet? And he goes, well, Speedy, he says, a lot of times here in the laboratory, we test projectiles. That's what they call bullets. Mm-hmm. And he said there's some projectiles that are designed to be exceptional, and then when we run them through a barrel, they're not exceptional. And he said there's other projectiles that we take, they're nothing special, and when we run them through a barrel under the pressure and the rifling out, they come out exceptional, So he said, in and of itself, that bullet you sent me doesn't appear to be an exceptional bullet, He said, but if you really want to test it, he said, I'll send you the specs and you do me a pressure barrel. And when we set up to do spark photography, we always do, 5 to 10 rounds to calibrate all the cameras and everything. He said it costs $10,000 a shot if you want to have it done.
Wow.
So he said, we'll use that barrel to calibrate and you get it done for free.
Yeah.
So he said it'll cost you a barrel, a chamber, and some brass and bullets, you know. So it cost me about $1,000 to get this done. And so I sent all that stuff to him there again. We had the long wait, about 6 weeks before Bob finally called me back. And he said, well, he said, we've run that bullet of yours over 3 calibrations of spark photography. He said, let me tell you, he says, it is an exceptional bullet, you know. He said, a lot of bullets, when they come out of a barrel, he said, they're always pitching and yawing, and they'll do that for, 20 yards, 30 yards, 50 yards, depending on the projectile. He said every one of the spark photography that we've done with that bullet comes out instantly stable. So we theorized, or he theorized, that that's why that bullet shot so well, because it was so stable in flight that it wasn't moving as much by the conditions as other bullets were.
So do you believe about, these long bullets that we shoot for F-class, that they can shoot bad at 100 but then can shoot good farther out?
That may go back to that same stability, but I think if they don't shoot at 100, they're not going to shoot anywhere else.
That's kind of my take on that. If they don't shoot at 100, let's just say they shoot big at 100, right? Let's say 1 inch at 100.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to make them? Because for them to shoot smaller long range, and typically they don't talk about smaller in group size, but in MOA, right? So for example, at 100 shooting 1 MOA, but maybe at 500 shooting half MOA.
Right.
I don't think there's anything that could change, because those bullets are already on a path. They would have to change that path, right? They would have to course correct in order for them to come back in.
Well, in bench res, I don't know if you could call this a phenomenon or not, but there's a lot of shooters that say, I shoot better at 200 than I do at 100,
Mm-hmm.
And it's not really that they're shooting any better. At 200 yards, you're not expecting a single hole group,
Right.
So at 200 yards, a good group on the average is somewhere between about 350 to a 5.
Mm-hmm.
So if I shoot 5 half-inch groups, that gives me a quarter-inch ag when you average it together,
Right.
So the shooter thinks that he did better at 200 yards than he did at 100, and I think that's what the people are seeing. They'll go out and they'll shoot at 100, and then they'll go to 300 yards and they'll shoot, I'm gonna say a 1-inch group,
Right.
and they feel great about that 1-inch group at 300 or at 400 or 500, but it's really not that shooting that good,
Right,
I think
right.
there's an example on those videos you did where the gentleman tried to follow your example of tuning,
Yeah.
and then he just made up some groups that were going to happen that didn't.
So that's right at 3 inches. That is definitely under sub MOA. Unfortunately, I didn't let up another 5 hand loads at a different or closer seating depth to the lands, but I guarantee if I had, I would have shot something like this.
Yeah, that was awesome. He's
Yeah,
like,
that's
this is my group now.
fantastic shooting. I wish I could have won that match the other day by making the groups up and telling me, the next group was going to be a 0.
Yeah. Okay, so you've seen my 1.3 inch group. First 4 shots were in 0.3,
Yep.
and the last one opened it up to 1.3. Oh. Okay. My goodness. That is a 1.3 inch group at 1,000 yards.
I forgot where that last shot went.
It went high.
All right.
But, okay, so do you think I pulled that shot at 1,000 yards, being what it was about 3/4 of an inch higher than all the others?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that was a pulled shot, or what do you think happened?
Well, in bench rest, and I'm just referring to this because I've ran a lot of matches, and I've been the range officer at matches, so I get to see some of the competitors that are doing well, especially like the newbies,
Yeah.
and they're possibly going to win their first match. So I've usually bet somebody that's standing right there, I'll tell them, I'll bet you a $10 bill to $1 bill that guy will shoot the last shot out the bottom of his group,
Mm-hmm.
and so I've lost maybe 2 or 3 of those bets because they always do it. Yeah. And I think it's just anticipation, that last shot, and you want to get it over with so quickly that to lose a shot low is usually when you jerk up on the trigger, you pull the whole back of the gun up, and the muzzle goes down, it goes out the bottom, you know.
Right.
And I think a good friend of mine, Jack Neri, he even explains that in one of his bench rest videos about the insurance shot. So we always tell them on your last shot, it doesn't hurt you at all to hold up just slightly, so that if you do anticipate that last shot, that it'll still go down, but into the group, you know.
Right.
But I think I've seen a lot of people rush that last group, and as they're returning the gun back to battery, you know, they torch it off a little bit sooner. You know, you shoot a set breast,
right?
And so when you use your joystick, do you always come up or do you come down on your groups?
I don't remember what I did there. I do whatever, whatever it needs.
And like I say, I found that with using a joystick rest, especially with an F-class gun, they're so heavy that if you come down with the gun, you're already setting up that gun to shoot low out the bottom because it's coming down. It's like when you're tightening something, you know. So if you don't hold that joystick firmly, when you shoot that last shot, it has a tendency to want to go down low, you know. And we see that in the bench rest guns real easy because there's so little recoil. We'll see the crosshairs drop, you know.
Right.
So when I use a joystick rest, I always come up from the bottom. And I say, if you look at my targets, you'll always see my groups form right below where I'm aiming, you know. Even when I'm F-class, I always come up and I'll aim maybe at 12 o'clock on the X-ring, and so I can see where my spotter's at, you know, as I'm coming up, so I can evaluate it. So it makes it easier to hold for the next shot.
Right.
So I can evaluate as I'm coming up. Plus, I'm not setting that gun up to drop down.
So, back to the question: do you think that was a pulled shot, or you think that's just part of the group?
From what you explained to me on how you shot that group, I would say that it's part of the group.
Yeah, I mean that's the surprising thing is that the first 4 are the abnormal ones.
Right.
Right, because they all went in the same hole. That's almost impossible, right? The one that was 3/4 of an inch away from the other ones, to me, that's more normal than anything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So the thing that most people don't think about is that is a .125 MOA group.
Right.
The dot on my scope is .125 MOA. So the
your
dot
covers your whole
dot
group.
covers up the entire group.
Right.
You know what I mean? But because it's outside a little bit, they're like, oh, you pull that shot. And I can guarantee you, I didn't pull that shot. And if you go watch that video again, you'll see how I let it go. And I'm like, yes. Because when I let it go, it takes a few seconds to get there, right?
Right.
If you pull a shot, you know immediately.
Yeah.
And I pulled it. I squeezed the trigger, and then I waited, and then when it landed, I'm like, yes, because I knew it was a good shot. I was just hoping that some other external force didn't blow that shot somewhere else.
Well, like I said, I don't think that's just part of the group. Yeah. Had it been low at the bottom, I would have thought that you shot that because
trust me, I pulled shots.
You anticipated the
I've
shot.
pulled shots in my life, more than I care to admit, but. That was but anyway, it's just something to talk about, right? Because everybody thinks, oh, you pulled the last shot. Because I said, oh my God, don't blow this, but that's part of the.
Well, I think part of the .125 MOA group is not
acceptable.
I'd take those all day long.
Well, and see, I just happen to say it out loud, right? The don't blow this, because I talk to myself a lot when I'm shooting.
Well, I do too.
Like, hey, stay focused. Okay, just don't blow this. Do what
right.
Hey, get back to the flags. Because oftentimes what happens, right? Most new shooters are like, they're shooting great, and they get, in F class, they're getting to about shot 18 or 19, and then they go, oh man, I'm about to clean this.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm talking about. You start anticipating the end coming, and you just go to pot.
So what I do if I start doing it, I'm like, hey, okay, get back on target, get back on the conditions, and then I start talking to myself. I'm like literally coaching myself.
Right.
And then I just go.
I do the same thing. I mean, when I'm shooting, especially in the first part of the season when I don't have my rhythm,
Right.
as I'm always telling myself, slow down, look at the flags one more time,
Right. So back to Virgil. Do you know what he did to that brass to make his gun arc? That's what he talks about at the end of that article.
I had to go back and read that article myself, but he was always doing something to the brass, and they were really playing with the BR brass and stuff at that time. He and Colonel Jackson from Austin, and we talked about a little bit those step necks where you just seat the bullet into that thing. They were really playing with that, where there wasn't any influence from the neck at all inside the bullet. They were
right,
and they were talking on the release of that bullet, into the bore. So it could be something. I had to go back and read that article to look at. But when we did all that experimentation, I said I was over there somewhere between 6 and 8 times, just to test components. That's when I started to make bullets, and some of the premier powders of the day started to come out. We wanted to test and see how good it was.
right.
But most of the stuff he did was, like I said, it was just very incremental movements of the bullet, incremental decreases of the neck tension. He'd start heavy and then he'd start getting lighter and lighter and lighter.
Yeah.
And then in some other instances we were out there, he'd start light and get heavier and heavier and heavier. And he had special bushings made. And we were using the old knock-in dies in those days. We didn't have the S-type dies that we have nowadays. And he had all his bushings custom made. There was a gentleman by the name of Wilbur Cooper that was making those bushings for him. So some of them were just tenths of a thousandths different from another.
Wow. So what's the S stand for in type S?
Well, Speedy.
Does it really?
Yeah.
So how did that come about?
In the old days, we used to use the old Wilson-style knock-in dies, where we'd knock the case in there with just size the neck. It wouldn't size the body. And this is going to make you happy. And
let me get you done with that cup?
I'll get it out of the way. Anyway, I said this is going to make you happy because in the old days, we used the Wilson knock-in dies and then knock them back out, and it would just size the neck. It would leave the body perfectly fire-formed to the chamber.
Okay.
And so with the PPC brass and the BR brass, it was all the little short, squatty body cases, That brass tends to work hard and real quickly, so it gets to where after 3 or 4 firings of this perfectly formed brass to the chamber, that you couldn't hardly lift the bolt anymore, So you disturb the gun considerably when you lifted the bolt. You want to turn the gun over, especially since our guns only weigh 10.5 pounds, and you have the opposite effect when you close the bolt. And so in your front bag, that opening and closing would start making a divot either side, so your gun wound up high centering like this.
Right.
The beauties of a perfectly fire-formed case to the chamber. So what we started doing after we noticed that we couldn't hardly open and close the bolt anymore, we would buy a full-length size die, and we'd take a carbide chucking reamer and ream the neck out so it wouldn't touch the neck, And we would size that brass before every aggregate. So before a 100-yard aggregate, we'd size that brass, and then it'd go in the gun just like God made it, Right. And then by the time we get to the last 4th or 5th match, it was like, And so I was going to a match on Sunday, and I was making some brass, and I said, I wonder if I could just put a bushing in this full-length size die. And so I worked all morning long. I needed a 9/16 18 deal to get that bushing to fall in, because I needed something slightly larger than a 1/2 inch. That's the diameter of the bushings. And so I went through 3 taps to try to tap that hard die. I was able to bore it out pretty easy with a carbide boring bar, but to tap it was a different thing. So our shop was just north of Fort Worth. Had to drive all the way to Dallas twice to get those 2 taps. And by the time I was through, that one die had cost me 3/4 of a day's work and 2 trips to Dallas to get it tapped. So the match was the next day, and I told Stick that worked for me, I'm going to range. And I went out there and I shot, and I've never shot so many small groups. I mean, that full-length size in that case with that bushing in it, I came back and Stick goes, well, how'd that go? I said, you're not going to believe how good this gun shoots. And I said, man, it works just like God every time I close the bolt.
Stick Starks, right?
Yeah, Stick Starks.
Rest in peace.
Uh-huh. And so that next day, I went to the match, and I would just slaughter. It was like me and everybody else. Yeah. And everybody said, you full-length size it? And I said, no, this is just a neck size die, And I said, I couldn't find my knocker die, so I just lied to everybody. And so they just ignored it,
Well, that was kind of the way, right? Like everybody was out there looking for the new best thing, and then once you found it, you go win a bunch of matches before it.
Oh yeah, I won matches for a year and a half until Stick said, why don't you do like Speedy does and make a die with a bushing in it, So anyway, after he spilled the beans, everybody wanted die, so we started making the dies ourselves, And then, after about 10 of them, I didn't want to make anymore. You know how that is.
Yeah.
Just like those tuners, you probably didn't mind making the first few by hand, and then after that, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And so we contacted Redding. I knew I was real good friends with Richard Beebe there, and he agreed to make these dies for us. And then after a while, they said, man, we can't make these dies in the quantity you're needing. I mean, you're going to have to up your quantity to 50 dies, And then I said, man, we're just, a 2-man shop here. We don't have a retail store or anything. Right. That's a lot of money for us just to put on the shelf, because we had 6 PPC, 6 BR, 308s, 22-250, which was a varmint cartridge. It was real popular at the time, Acme improved. And at the SHOT Show, I talked to the guys at Hornady, and they agreed to do it. And so we switched from Redding to Hornady, and then it went good for about a year, and then the same deal. You got to make more dies.
Yeah.
And so we just quit making them, and we just made them one-off for the customer, And then Redding called me back up and said, hey, is anybody making these dies? Well, we got a lot of call for them, And I said, no. I said, if you'll make these specs, the PPC, the VR, and so they call them the small base dies to keep our specs, and they had the regular ones. And then they named it S for Speedy.
Cool. See, those are the things I want to know, because I've heard that before, that's what it meant.
Yeah.
But I just remember, I always forgot to ask you, but hey,
Yeah, well, that's how that came about. That S doesn't mean anything, but
that's how the full length size, the Redding Type S came about.
Yep.
And so, you guys used to all neck size. And then,
oh yeah, unfortunately, we didn't know any better.
Right. Well, see, that's kind of the thing, right? As you know, that's a pretty sore subject.
Well, I said nowadays, if you go to a benchers match and you're using a neck size die and all that, and that people see, they're like, "What's wrong with you?" You know. And our guns are designed to shoot zeros.
Well, the funny thing about that is a lot of people on the comments on that video, they go to a benchers match. All those guys neck size.
There's not.
Yeah. They.
If you do, you'd be the odd man out.
Yeah, and you'd be the one at the bottom of the.
For more likely, yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the thing about, right? It's all this dogma that surrounds the reloading world and the precision shooting. It seems like the guys that are shooting at the top of their game, and they all reload about the same way, correct?
Pretty much, yeah.
But they don't really go out and tell nobody about it. They do their thing and they win and they go home, right? They talk to the other top shooters and that's it, right?
Right.
And that's kind of what I'm doing, right? I'm bridging that gap and I'm telling people like, hey,
getting all the secrets away.
Right. I am, and I've been told times before, many times, like, hey, what are you doing? Just shut up, But I like passing it on. I think, because what I think is it really helps the new shooters get good, right? Mm-hmm. And what happens when you get good?
Well, I think not only does it help the new shooter, I think it keeps them more interested in the sport, because if you're frustrated with everything you do it just makes you not want to stay with that sport for.
Right, and man, this whole neck sizing thing is my goodness, it's
Like I said,
we
that's 1960s tech right there.
right, and we haven't done it in F class. We haven't done that in ever.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because obviously, I started shooting F class around 2008, and even then I didn't neck size because I started hunting, and I used to neck size because I would read articles and things and you got a neck size. You know what I mean? But of course, I was not looking into bench rest guys. I was reading just Joe Blow in a hunting forum saying you got a neck size, and I started neck sizing, and I had nothing but problems. And that's when I realized I'm just gonna quit doing this, and I did. I quit, and my scores went up. Everything just functioned better. I wouldn't upset the gun. I could shoot faster.
You won't all the lock and lugs on your lugs or your receiver.
Just all my problems all of a sudden went away. And the weird thing is my flyers went away.
Mm-hmm.
I used to get this crazy flyers next.
Well, that's how we used to get our flyers. Like I said, on that front bag where we used to dig that divot in from open and close it. You'd pull the trigger, and that all of a sudden that gun would rock into that divot. We were just too stupid to know that that's what was causing all that.
What happens like incrementally, right? It doesn't happen all at once, so you don't even notice it. It just keeps getting worse and worse.
And like I said, when I first started full length sizing and using the bushing to control my neck tension, I said for a year and a half you couldn't beat me, and people didn't know what are you doing? What do you got different? Nothing.
Yeah.
The only thing I was doing was eliminated that tight, case in the chamber and that hard bolt lip and hard bolt closure.
Right. Yeah, it's crazy how much better guns shoot. And people are always worried about brass life and all that, but I don't think, from what I've seen, I used to lose more brass neck sizing because the web would get too big and I'd have extraction issues.
Yeah.
I'd actually lose more brass through neck sizing than I do through full length sizing. We're only bumping the shoulder back 2000s, which is hardly anything.
Yeah, the only caveat to full length sizing is you do have to have a die that matches your chamber. You can still oversize that case in that chamber where it's causing the gun not to perform to its full potential.
Right, but when you say matches, because I use Type S on my 6BR 6x47.
Right.
You just it's okay. That's another thing that people bring up all the time. Like, these guys are all shooting custom chambers, custom dies.
Right. Well, that's where you come into the problem. Yeah, if you use more or less standard SAMI spec, chambers and all, Redding's dies match those pretty good.
Right.
But if you get to some of the tighter chambers like we might use in bench rest, and we apply a lot of that same criteria to when we order reamers for 6BR, 6-dasher, a 308, a 284. So in that situation, we make our own full-length size dies to match those.
Well, the reason for that is most of what we're shooting in competition, like a Shihane, you can't really just go buy a Shihane sizer, right? So you make your own die, but like I said, everything else, and see, that's the thing that people are worried about. It's like, they're shooting all these custom chambers, custom dies, but it doesn't have to be custom. It just has to be a good match.
Right.
That's the
you
bottom
can, if you're ordering pretty close to standard SAMI specs, if you call an order, I'll say a 6.5 Creedmoor, but instead of a standard 297 neck on it, you want a 294 or 291, and that's the only change you made, and you bought a S die from Redding, more than likely that die is going to fit that reamer pretty good because you didn't make any body changes.
Right,
to it,
just the neck. But anyway, that's just one of those things that people think, it works for them because they have all these custom dies, custom chambers. But Type S is my favorite die, and you know what I mean.
That's it. Redding is over the years strove to maintain a high quality and dimensional stability from die to die to die.
Yeah.
So the only issue I've had with any of the Redding dies is that most of their dies are set up for their graduated shell holders, and so their chamber is a little bit deeper. So if you were to take a RCBS standard shell holder and screw the Redding die all the way down to it and ran your brass in there, you would probably still be about 10 thousandths from the shoulder of the case hitting the shoulder of the die itself. Right there.
Okay.
So that's why they have the graduated shell holder. If you have that scenario, you can take and put the number 2 in it, and it'll come back and it'll start to bump the shoulder back 2000s, 2000s, 2000. So that may work pretty good with your scenario sizing brass, you know.
Yeah, I mean that would make it easy. But
But
anyway,
then you have to pay $75 for that graduated shell holder set, you know.
what I used to do back in the day, I flipped that shell holder over and just take it over sandpaper and do figure eights until it worked.
Right. But that's the only issue. 'Cause I have a lot of people say, well, I can't push my shoulder back on my Redding S die, you know. So we usually just put them in the lathe and face off 15 thousandths off the bottom, and that leaves us 5 thousandths where we can push that shoulder back if you want to go back to pretty close to, you know, factory settings or something like that.
Right.
You can't just go right up to the shell holder or you'll be creating excessive headspace.
Right. But anyway, well, that was interesting.
All righty. Anytime, boss.
Thank you, boss.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
All righty. Keep them small.